Welcome to the August of 2025 session of the Richmond IONS Community Group. As for those who are not familiar with IONS, it is an organization that was begun back in 1973. IONS stands for Institute of Noetic Sciences, and it was founded by a fellow named Edgar Mitchell, who was the lunar landing module pilot for Apollo 14. And like some of those fellows who walked on the moon during the Apollo era, I think his was in 70 or 71, I can't remember which. He had a takeaway from that experience, and it was a unity consciousness experience as he was on his way back to Earth and looking through the porthole of the Apollo capsule and seeing the Earth off in the distance as a pale blue dot. And he was resolved at that moment to dedicate the rest of his life to exploring the frontiers of consciousness, especially the interface between science and spirit. He had a Ph.D. in aeronautical engineering. He'd been a Navy test pilot, and that's how he became an Apollo astronaut. And so IONS was created as a vehicle for that pursuit, and it has spawned community groups around the world. Many of them fell by the wayside during the COVID era. We were lucky here, or maybe blessed, that we were able to keep going uninterrupted just by switching to Zoom for about 14 or 15 months, Zoom only. And then because when we were on Zoom, we picked up some people who were not local, and we decided to continue with the Zoom in combination with the in-person meetings, and we're now closing in on our 30th anniversary. We're more than halfway through our 30th year of meeting on the third Saturday of each month with a speaker, and we've been very blessed to be able to continue that uninterrupted. And we invite any of those who want to join our programs to simply put their name on. If there's some new people here today, put your name on the email list and you'll get the monthly flyer we have. I think someone came today based on our meetup posting, but we'd love to have you on our mailing list, and so the only qualification for membership in our group is just showing up. There's no dues, there's no obligation. Just show up and enjoy the programs, whether you're in person or online. We do survive only on the contributions of our members, so we encourage you to make. We'll pass a basket for a love offering during the course of the program today, and we encourage those who are here to reach into their pockets and find the interface between their wallets and their hearts, and wherever that lands you, put that into the basket. We also do not deny those joining us online the opportunity of making gifts. So you can do that by going to our website at richmondions.com, and there's a function on there for giving either through Venmo or through PayPal. And or those who are not technologically inclined, you can also mail a check just to the address that's on the email flyer, or give a check here today. Either way, so we have all kinds of opportunities that we make available to you for donating to our group, but there's no requirement for anyone to do so. What else are there any other announcements? I think Yes, Sana has one, so I'll step aside. She's online today, and see what she's going to announce.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you. So I'm just here to remind everybody of Richmond IONS practice offerings with Sanctuary of Earth. Sanctuary of Earth is a partner of Richmond IONS Community Group. We're here to fill that gap between knowledge and embodiment. So how to get from knowledge to embodiment is practice. So we have a teaser session each month. This month it is on next Sunday, a week from tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. It's an introduction to clear empathy. in recognition of our Claire Empathy class, where we're going to start on September 21st. I'll put a link to the Sanctuary of Earth website in the chat, but the invitation to the gather session is on our Facebook page and Meetup page. For those of you who are Reiki practitioners and want to expand your energy medicine practice, I'm also teaching Yin energy medicine the first weekend of September. So I hope you'll join us as we embody together. I think that's it. Thank you for this program.
Thank you, Sana. Sana Calvert is her last name. I'm sorry, I only introduced her by her first name. And having taken those classes myself, I can tell you they're very worthwhile. So, Carol Louie is going to conduct our opening meditation this morning. So, Carol, if you are ready for that, and also introduce our speaker.
So let's begin by taking a breath. Just breathe naturally. As we enter the space of deep connection, let us embrace the wisdom that has awakened within us and that continues to awaken. May the insights we receive take root in our being, gently unfolding in perfect time, guiding us towards clarity, healing, and growth. May the breath remind us of our presence, and the stillness remind us of our strength, and the dreams remind us of our infinite potential. We honor the mysteries within, the journeys still unfolding, and the unseen faces that support us on our path. As we begin to sense the peace of this in our waking world, moving with intention, speaking with kindness, and listening with open hearts. And believe it or not, that's a prayer created by AI. So it has its useful purposes. And I thought that was really a wonderful prayer. My hypnotherapy teacher cued that and shared it with us, so I asked if I could share it with you all. I'm really excited to present Jim Matlock as our speaker today. I forget how long ago it's been since I've met him, but I'm on several reincarnation Facebook pages. If you have not heard of Signs of Reincarnation Facebook group, I definitely recommend that you check it out. That's where I initially met Jim. Then I read his book, and then I did his class, and so I'm really excited that he's here today in person to be able to share his wisdom. He has done just valuable research in so many areas. But let me back up a little bit. He started out as a creative writer was his goal, and but switched over to anthropology as his doctorate. And I feel like the two have come together now because the writing in his book is just absolutely wonderful. And that background of anthropology, which I learned last night, that his background history really led the way for that, with traveling around the world and being exposed to many different cultures. He is a associate with the Rhine Research Institute, if you're familiar with that. and also with a fellow with the Parapsychology Foundation. So just some wonderful credentials. Also, if you have not seen, if you're familiar with New Thinking Aloud by Jeffrey Meshloff, he's got a wonderful 12-part series on that. And we were honored to have him as a speaker last year at the Reincarnation Symposium on a project that we were working on. And so without any further ado, I want to introduce you to Jim Matlock.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Let me say a couple of things to sort of fill in what you said. My father was in the Foreign Service, which is why I grew up overseas. You referenced that. The going into anthropology was not direct from the creative writing. The creative writing led me into my interest in reincarnation studies. And I was doing that reincarnation work before I decided to pursue the Ph.D. So I went into anthropology with the interest in reincarnation, right? And that's important, in this. But I've been doing this for quite a while now, for most of my adult life. And so I'm going to review a lot of that today. It's just going to be a general overview of the research that's been done and the research that I've been doing. And I'll leave questions at the end. I'll try to at least to leave time for questions at the end. So if, I prefer you not interrupt me. Let me try to get through all of this and then see if you can hold your questions to the end. We're set up to take those. Okay, is the sound okay? Everything okay? So we'll just continue then. I thought it was. Let's see here. Yeah, it is green. All right, well, would you advance it for me then? We tested this and it worked, but now it's on. All right. Okay. So the rich tapestry of reincarnation research. This is a title that Tom actually gave to my talk. It's not one I selected, but I think it's very apt. It really works for this because there are a lot of different strands here that we'll try to weave together. So this is just an outline of how it's going to go. First of all, I'll say a few things about the beliefs, not too much because I don't want to take time for that. And I'll run through the principal signs of reincarnation that have developed through the research, talk about near universal and culture linked case patterns that have emerged, and then my theory, and then the last sections get into cases, many of which I've studied that in one way or another, relate to my theory. So I want my theory out there first before we get into those, and then at the end the questions. Okay, we can go into the next one. All right, so beliefs about reincarnation, and I put up the list here, not because I want to go into each of them in any detail. I don't want to take the time to do that, but I want to make some points. When we think about reincarnation beliefs, we usually think about Hinduism and Buddhism, but actually the belief is it's older than that and it's much more widespread than that. You found reincarnation beliefs in ancient Greece and Rome. Pythagoras, for instance, is well known. Plato also is well known for having gone into them. You find it also in Judaism, both ancient and modern Judaism, and various Middle Eastern peoples like the Druze of Lebanon, Syria, Israel, Jordan, that area. And we have a speaker, Qatar Hatum, in a couple of months. We'll be talking about the Druze. And then also in tribal societies throughout the world. And this is what, as an anthropologist, really interested me to find when I went into anthropology, that actually these beliefs are very, very widespread in the world. Upwards of 50%, 50 to 60% of indigenous cultures today continue to have reincarnation beliefs. So we don't know how many had them in the past, and those have been lost. But that's quite significant. Okay, you can go into the next slide. All right, good. Okay, so down at the bottom, thanks, whatever you did there. Yeah, so a couple of general points that I want to make about this. So karma and transmigration, and what I mean by transmigration is movement from humans to animals or cross species. It can be cross species of animals, right? From cats to dogs or whatever, but it's a cross species. Transmigration is cross species, whereas reincarnation is within the same species, right? And in the Eastern traditions, in the way we're normally used to thinking about reincarnation, right? First of all, there's the idea of karma, and then the idea that we can come back, as another species of animal, or even not necessarily even an animal. And both of these are much less common in these other traditions, right? So we have to learn to separate them from a belief in reincarnation, right? So reincarnation does not necessarily assume ideas of karma, for instance. Reincarnation does not necessarily assume that there's going to be transmigration, right? Much less transmigration as a result of one's karma, right? That's those are ideas that are often considered part of reincarnation, but they really come from Hinduism and Buddhism and not these other traditions. Okay, next slide. Oh, I can advance it now myself. All right. Now, there are also different ideas about when reincarnation comes about. All right. Like in Buddhism, reincarnation is supposed to happen at conception. It's at conception that consciousness joins the sperm and the egg to create the person. Among the Druze, it doesn't happen at conception. It happens at birth, right? Immediately upon death, God puts the soul into a body then being born. So there's no intermission period at all. In Hinduism, they allow, for reincarnation to come during gestation, or even in some cases after birth. So Hinduism is much more flexible about that. But at any rate, the point I want to make here is that when we talk about reincarnation, there's no established idea of what it is, right? There's so many different beliefs about it, right? That the only way that I see that we can really decide what reincarnation is and then answer the question, is there evidence for it, is to actually get into the research. Now, why didn't this next screen come up? Maybe I turned it off rather than on. Okay, that would have done it, wouldn't it? All right, enter Ian Stevenson. Okay, so Ian Stevenson initiated modern reincarnation research in 1961. That was the year that he went to India and Ceylon on his first tour of investigation. And he expected at the time to hear about children who spoke about previous lives, right? I mean, this is what interested him in it. He'd heard some of these stories. But he was surprised to learn that in addition to talking about the previous lives, the children had similar personality traits, because very often they talked about them, they could identify the person that they were before, and when they went back and then looked at the people the children recalled having been, compared the two lives, they realized that the children had similar personality traits, similar behaviors. There were other similarities. It wasn't just the memories. Stevenson later focused on birthmarks and birth defects, and that's something we'll come back to. These are also a feature of these cases, and understanding theoretically how that could be, because we reincarnate into a new body, how can that be? This is something we'll come back to when we talk about theory. But by his death in 2007, Stevenson had studied about 2,500 cases personally, right? And published reports of over 250 of them, over 10% of them. Now, so what did this again? What did The buttons are close together. Okay, so the principal signs of reincarnation. Now we're getting into Stevenson's findings. What did he learn about in all these years of study? So first of all, there are the claims to remember previous lives that I mentioned, right? That's what really interested him in this, because he had done this, he'd done a review and found in 1960, he published a paper, a review paper, and he had found 44 cases that had been published of children who claimed to remember previous life, whose identities had been, the previous life identities had been determined, plus their in many of these cases, there were actually written records that had been made of the children's statements before the verifications in 26 out of the 24 cases. So this interested him in it, and that's why he got a grant from the Parapsychology Foundation to go to India and Sri Lanka. And that's when he realized that much more was going on here than simply the claims to remember previous lives. There are also in these cases many times recognition memories. When the kids go back, and he was focusing on children primarily, when they went back to places that they said they lived, they recognized the places, they recognized people. Many of these children actually led the way back to what they said that was previous home. Right? So it's not just declarative memories. It's not just episodic memories. It's also the recognition memories that are going on. In addition to that, they have a behavioral, emotional, and other implicit types of past life memories, right? So the explicit type of memories, the declarative memories, the ones we talk about, right? The episodic that we imaged. And then in addition to that, there are behavioral, emotional, and other things that are more subconscious, right? And those are called implicit. And so those also are a big part of these cases. Then there are the physical signs like the birthmarks and birth defects. Now, these signs all appear in cases from indigenous tribal societies as well as from accounts throughout history. And this is really struck me. This is what struck me as I went into anthropology and began reading about reincarnation beliefs in different societies. Very often, the beliefs were related to these same signs, the same signs that Stevenson was finding, right? The memories to remember previous lives, the behaviors, the personalities. And in tribal societies, they use these signs then to identify the previous person. And that's so seeing that, that made it even more significant, right? Because this suggests that this is something that's quite old, right? These signs they're human things, right? Birthmarks, birth defects. I mean, and other, and memories and personality things. These are pan-human sort of things. All right. So then, with his 2,500 cases, he was actually able to look at patterns, right? And we see a variety of different kinds of patterns. Some of them are what are called near universal, and some of them are more cultural linked. I say near universal and not universal because although you find these in the majority of societies and almost all, there are exceptions. But anyway, the near universal patterns are interesting. First of all, for some reason, the majority of kids, and this hasn't been looked at with adults so much, the majority of kids are male, recalling the previous lives. Now, we have so many cases, there are an awful lot of cases of girls too, but we don't really know why that is. Now, but it may have something to do with the fact that that the memories are can be of violent deaths, and males are more likely to die violently. This we'll come back to in a moment. Another universal thing is the first speaking of past life at an early age, and I'm talking about ages of 2 and 3, 18 months. Okay, as they first begin to speak, they will start talking. Some of them, not always, they'll start talking about a previous life. Others, like my daughter, was one of these at age 3. And when she started talking about it, it was clear that she had already had them for a while, and she had figured out that her memories were of a previous life, right, at age 3. So I don't know how long she'd had them, but okay. But this is very common. Now, for Stevenson thought that another universal pattern was fading by late childhood. He thought 5 to 8 because that's what he saw in the majority of his cases, that there was the early start and then a fading. We now know, because the research has been done on this, that there's many exceptions to fading by late childhood. Many children carry them forward into adulthood, and it can be quite high. As Katara will be talking about in a couple of months, in the Druze, it's really very impressive, where you have 60, 70% more percent of people who recall lives in childhood still retain them into adulthood. And as Carol mentioned, we looked at, Carol and Katara and I looked at, interviewed someone living in Richmond, in fact. It was one of Stevenson's subjects in the from 69 to the early 70s, who still at age 60 still retains his memories. So that was very interesting. Now I'll try not to turn it off, but simply to go on. Okay, so the first set of near universal patterns related to the case subject. There are also, interestingly enough, a set of patterns that relate to the previous life, the previous person, right? So I've mentioned behavioral personality traits carry over. Mental qualities can also carry over, right? And this is one of the things that suggests that we're talking about consciousness here. When we're talking about reincarnation, we're talking about consciousness, the reincarnation of consciousness. Children come back faster when deaths are natural. All right. But violent deaths predominate. In the cases overall, I mean, some studies have shown up to 60%, maybe even over 60%, depending on the sample, but somewhere between 50 and 60%. Now, that is much higher than the rate of violent death in any of these cultures. But that's what we see in the cases. So it seems very clear that violent deaths somehow play into this. The thinking is it's not because the violent death causes people to come back. The thinking is that the violent deaths are more memorable, right? And so it just makes them easier to remember. And therefore the children remember them. Adults also. Okay. Then there's the culture link pattern that has to do with incident and solvability. Cases are more common in some places than others. Right? They're particularly common among the Druze. That's why we keep coming back to this. The only systematic study that has been done was done in India, and it was a ground-to-ground census in only one village. So it's hard to generalize really from that. But what that found is 2.2, estimated in the end, 2.2 per thousand. Right. It seems to be much higher in among the Druze. There was a attempt by Jim Tucker at DOPS to University of Virginia to survey this in the United States, but it came back with such a high incidence that they were suspicious about it, and that was never published. But it may be that the cases are more highly developed and more likely to be solved in places than others. So even though it seems that we have a lot of these memories that are coming up in the United States and in the Western cultures, and we see this on Facebook, we see this on other social media, people who become more comfortable now, a lot of these memories are not really very well developed, right? They're not well enough developed for us to know who the previous person was. So this plays into this too, this whole incident thing. But we don't really know because we have not had the surveys yet that we need to have to be able to pin this down. Okay, another cultural linked pattern is sex change. There are some societies that have more sex change cases than others do. There are some cases like the Druze that think that it's impossible to change sex, and we don't really have cases. Qatar has learned about one, but Stevenson found none, and there are at least very few. Now, is it that they exist and they're just not reported to us? That's a possibility. We can't be sure. But it does seem as if culture somehow it plays into that, the incidence of the sex change. Another one is what I call relationship status, and this has to do with whether there's a family relationship, whether there's an acquaintance relationship, whether there's a stranger relationship between lives, right? Because we see cases of all those three sorts, and that the family relationships are especially common in tribal societies, like almost 100%. They have the strong belief that they return in the clan, if it's a lineal society, and so that's what you see there. For some reason, the stranger relationships are much more common in Asia than in Europe. And in Europe and the US, we see more family cases. Intermission length. The intermission is the period between lives. That's the term that Stevenson introduced for the period between lives. So we talk about intermission length. It varies a lot. It varies a great deal. In Stevenson's data, it's only about 15 months, 15 to 18 months. Now, his sample was predominantly Asian. Okay. As we've begun to study more Western cases, what we've found is that it's in the order of decades. Okay. The median for American cases is 25 years. So there's a big difference there, and we don't really understand why. Okay. It could be that in the West we have this idea that when we die we're going to meet our loved ones, and they vice versa think they're going to meet us. Excuse me. They're going to see us again. Maybe they hang around longer. We don't really understand why, but that is an important thing. Okay, now moving on to my theory here, trying to understand all of this. So in my book, Signs of Reincarnation, I followed the case data. People who follow the money, I followed the case data. And I think that's really important, in trying to understand what reincarnation is, because as I said, there's so many different beliefs about it. If we're going to come to some understanding about what reincarnation is and whether there's any evidence for it, we have to look at the case data, it seems. All right, so in thinking about what it was that reincarnated, because that was the first question, what is it that reincarnates if something does? I realized that the best way to think about that was simply consciousness, right? Our consciousness survives the death of our bodies and then reunites with another body later. Now, I consider consciousness to be duplex, and this really shouldn't be a surprise for most of us. That we have a subconscious, we're all aware of that. We have a subconscious as well of our conscious awareness. Very often, but I have to make this point because very often, particularly in philosophy and in psychology, consciousness is talked about simply as the conscious awareness, right? And the subconscious is forgotten about, unless you're a clinical psychologist, and then you're very well aware. But I think we need to keep in mind that we have a subconscious as well as the conscious awareness. And for me, memories and information about behavior, emotion, personality, all that is recorded in our subconscious minds. It's recorded in our subconscious. And what that means is that when reincarnation occurs, and reincarnation I think we can best think of as a possession of a body, right? There's a new body, the consciousness stream says survive death, it takes possession of that new body. Okay, and that allows it to occur at any point during gestation, because we've got a lot of cases where the intermission is under 9 months. A lot of them. All right. But when it happens, when reincarnation happens, when the consciousness comes into affiliation with a new body, there's a reset, my term, at the level of awareness. Okay. So in a sense, we start talking, we set up with this tabula rasa at a conscious level. But all that stuff is still there at the subconscious level. And from the subconscious, it can influence us from the inside. And sometimes these memories can bubble up to the surface, right, into our conscious awareness. But they're all still there, right? And we see the influences from behaviors, from personality, from traumas, from the previous life. We see these affecting the new life, even if they're not conscious memories, right? So that's an important thing to understand. Okay, now physical defects, and I mentioned before, this is something we need to understand theoretically, and for many of us, for Stevenson too, and for me, when we first came to this material, we set the physical stuff aside. It took Stevenson a couple of years to realize he was hearing about this so much that he had to try to figure out what was going on. It was the same way with me. I mean, I was reading these cases, and it took me a while to realize, look, I mean, I have to understand this somehow. So the explanation that I came to is that they're basically psychogenic. What I mean is that the consciousness then is responsible through psychokinesis, through PK, bio-PK, as we talk about in parapsychology, to impose its self-identity, right? Its self-awareness of what it looks like, of wounds to its body, and of other things on its new body. Because the birthmarks and birth defects, I mean, they're not just wounds. They can be earring holes. They can be tattoos. They can be anything of significance to the previous person, right? So the emotional significance of something seems to have a great deal to do with whether or not they transmit. And then that's a clue. That's a major clue that we're dealing with something psychogenic here. Now, the last point here, the same psychogenic process that can affect the body's tissues to produce birthmarks and birth defects, in order for it to allow for the transmission of behaviors, of emotions, behaviors, emotions, personality traits, all of these things we know involve the brain, right? And so transmitting them involves changes to the brain. It has to. But the same psychogenic process then that occurs during reincarnation can bring about changes to the brain, laying down the neural pathways that are necessary to carry these things forward. How am I doing on time? Okay. Now, moving on past this, and I'll start talking about some cases at this point. Intermission memories and discarnate agency. So I talk about intermission length. There are also many kids who have memories of the period between death, memories of the period between death and rebirth. Those come up in 20% of cases, a fifth of them. Not a negligible number. The structure of these intermission experiences is very similar to NDEs. And just like with NDEs, you hardly ever hear about all stages in every one of them. But we can, in NDEs, they identify 3 stages. Leaving the body, and a stage of some length while they're out of body, and then a return to the body. With reincarnation, we add 2 more. So there's the return to a new body, and then being in the body and birth. Those make the 5 stages of reincarnation. And just like with NDEs, with the intermission memories, we often hear about these clairvoyant perceptions, right? I mean, with NDEs, people talk about seeing things that went on in the operating room, at the accident site, or whatever, right? With intermission memories, they'll talk about seeing how they died, right? Seeing their funeral, seeing their cremation or whatever, right? Things that can be verified. In the same way that with NDEs, they'll say things that are actually veridical, right? Suggesting that they really did see these things that they claim they saw. And these sorts of perceptions can continue right up until birth. And it can not just perceptions, it can also be PK actions, psychokinetic actions, which are viewed as poltergeist, right? In one of Stevenson's cases, a guy remembered having hung out in a tree. I mean, this is something that's that if I didn't put on here, I needed to put on here, and maybe it's on the next slide. The difference between cultural differences between Western and Eastern intermission memories. In the Western intermission memories, and this again has to do with cultural beliefs, we have the idea that after death we go to heaven, right? And so that's what Westerners, Americans, describe, going to heaven. Not so in the Asian cases. They talk about the intermission passing in a realistic terrestrial setting. So in one of these cases of Stevenson's, the kid said that after death he hung out in a tree in the courtyard of his former home. Okay, he correctly described various things that went on, okay, including naming children who were born after his death. He also said that there was a tree, that there was a swing tied to his tree, and he didn't like people swinging on the swing, right? When 2 women got on there at the same time, he caused the swing to break. In fact, that swing had broken. It had been on the tree, and it had broken when 2 women got on it. So we have these memories of these PK effects too, not just the perceptions. All right. Intermission memories and discarnate agency. Discarnate agency is a way to explain culture-linked patterns. So yeah, that sort of follows, right? Because I'm saying that what survives is our consciousness, right? And if that's the case, then what is surviving is going to be our belief systems, right? That we've acquired during life, and we just carry that over. And then our beliefs help shape our actions during the intermission, right? So we're not talking about simply about the perceptions and the PK actions. We're also talking about cognitive processes going on during the intermission, the same way as in NDEs, and those can include actually the choice of parents, the selection of parents. Announcing dreams and other contacts is reflecting discarnate agency. So announcing dreams are dreams that a pregnant woman or somebody close to her has, in which there is the sense that they're being contacted by a person who lets them know that they're being reincarnated with them, right? So the contacts come from the discarnate spirit through dreams. They can also they can be seen as apparitions, and not just through dreams. There are other ways that these contacts can be made. Interesting enough, one is pregnancy cravings. It turns out that many times these cravings, in these cases many times, the cravings turn out to be foods that that were favored in the previous life, right? And various other kinds of strange influences on mothers, pregnant women, will turn out to be somehow related to the previous person, particularly those that then just go away after the pregnancy is over. Now, okay, one of the things about discarnate agency here is that we're talking about, as I said, cognitive processes and about the ability to make decisions, right? And one of the decisions that is made is where to be reborn, right? Many children talk about choosing their parents, how their parents were chosen, why. In international cases, and that's the term we use for just to reincarnating in another country, international cases, it seems that we can see a conscious decision being made to reincarnate internationally. Okay, and this fits with one of the other patterns of Stevenson's cases. That not only is the intermission fairly short very often, but the reincarnation is often into the same region and the same ethnicity. So that seems to be the standard thing. And to go elsewhere requires intention. Now, I've looked at reincarnation following suicide because I began to notice that there are some really distinct patterns to suicide cases. First of all, the following suicide, the intermissions tend to be very short, shorter even than in other violent deaths. Okay, they also tend to involve coming back in the same family or among friends. And coming back among friends is even more striking, right? I mean, it requires intention maybe even more than simply being pulled back. It really suggests that this intention is a factor, right, in how reincarnation works. Miracle babies. This is something I'm just beginning to study now. The whole miracle baby phenomenon is wonderful because this has to do with pregnancies occurring when they were thought impossible. After menopause, after diseases that would have made it possible, after tubal ligations, after vasectomies for the father. And yet they happen, right? So it seems like the reincarnating spirit, the reincarnating consciousness has a way of overriding these biological processes and bringing about a conception if that's what it wants to do. And I've collected quite a few papers of this. I haven't published anything on it yet, but I will. Okay, near-death experiences in past life memory in adulthood. This is something else. I'm going to leave plenty of time for questions, I see. But this is something else that I'm beginning to get into, and I sort of stumbled on. You know, one of the well-known things about NDEs is that they have these after effects, right? They can have sometimes profound after effects on people. Well, it turns out that among those after effects is past life memory, is the ability to remember past lives more clearly, okay? I've got cases where the past life memories first surface after NDEs, regardless of the age at which the NDEs came. I have cases in which they became much clearer and well developed after the NDEs, and the cases were solved. That's the term we use when we've identified the previous person. Enough details are recalled after the NDEs, even if some memories were present before, to allow the previous life to be identified. So this is quite interesting, really, to see this effect. And this is something that has not been noted before. And I have a paper in press in the Journal of Near-Death Studies on that. That'll be out sometime. I've also been talking about the people with the people at DOPS about doing a survey, which we'll try to get into this. And so hopefully we'll learn more about this. And then the effects of autism. And at the announcement, it mentioned that I was beginning to look at this. And so I want to say a little bit about it. So I've studied 2 cases involving autistic adults. And I have others that I will be studying. The 2 cases that I have studied are really interesting and curious because they involve invisible companions. They don't involve declarative memories, though. So, I mean, the kids gave other evidence of being reincarnations, right? In one of these cases, there were very strong physical carryovers, birthmarks, birth defects. It was a boy who seemed to be the reincarnation of his uncle who had killed himself. And he had, the uncle had hung himself, and the boy had trouble with his throat. He had birthmarks on the back of his neck. And there were physical things, there were also behavioral things that tied him to his uncle, but no memories of his uncle's life, like most of these kids, none. What he did do is put those memories off onto an invisible companion. He displaced the memories onto an invisible companion. So it's as if he had them under some surface, subconsciously he had these memories. He just could not consciously relate them to himself. So he put them off on this invisible companion. And then there's a second case, very similar to this, that I've been studying, that that's even more dramatic in many respects, but has the same feature: no clear declarative memories, but an invisible companion onto which various types of memories seem to have been displaced. Now, in this second case, it's even more striking because I mentioned recognition memories as being part of this. When the girl first saw, and this is the case of a well-known person actually coming back, Nina Graboi, some of you may know her. The child claimed to remember Nina Graboi. Now, Nina Graboi wrote her autobiography before she died. She died in 1999. She wrote her autobiography. When the kid saw the book, she said, "That's my book. How'd you get my book?" And she took the book to her room, put it on her bed because it was her book. So she recognized this. Another thing she did, she was very much associated with the psychedelic scene in New York in the 60s and 70s, knew Timothy Leary, people like this, and later went out to California, to the Bay Area, and got involved with humanistic psychology. So she was acquainted with the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, and her mother is a humanistic psychologist, so had copies of the journal. Now, remember, Graboi died in 1999. In, I think it was 2003, around there, 4 maybe, I'm not sure the date, the Journal of Humanistic Psychology changed its cover design. When the kids saw the older issues of the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, she took possession of them. When she saw one of the new covers, she tore it off, said, "This is wrong." I mean, this is the sort of bizarre stuff that you can get in some of these cases, right? That really begins to tell you that there's something going on here. So it's things like this and all of the patterns that makes me think that reincarnation probably occurs. And my position now is it's the only intellectually responsible conclusion that we can reach from all of the case data. Now, on the on the last point that I say down here, interestingly, autism sometimes affects episodic memory formation. And I think this is key. This is why we see this in the autistic cases. Okay? Because as I began to look into the literature on autism, I found that there are several studies that have found that autism can, in some cases, not all, like everything with autism, it varies a lot, but it can interfere with episodic memory formation. And episodic memories are the personal memories that we have, right? The imaged memories that we have of our personal lives. And so if these subjects didn't have one of them was a girl, one of them was a boy, if these kids didn't have the episodic memories there, they wouldn't have had the ability then to relate to them. Because in most of these cases, the kids who talk about them, they talk about them in first person. They say, I did this, I did that, I experienced this, I experienced that, right? These kids know, but if they don't have the episodic memories there, they can't do that. On the other hand, the same studies have found, or other studies, have found that autism does not seem to affect other kinds of memory, right? It doesn't affect the recognition memories, for instance. It doesn't seem to affect the emotional memories. And this is exactly what we see in these cases. We see all the physical stuff, we see the emotional stuff, we see the behavioral stuff. That's still coming through. What we see is that they don't seem to have the episodic memories. They can't make that connection to themselves, and therefore they displace this onto an invisible companion. That's my conclusion there. I don't know how else to explain it. What this, and I guess I'll sum up with this. So if my theory is correct, the reincarnation involves the post-mortem survival of consciousness and subsequent possession of a new body, right? And all types of memory are recorded in the subconscious. Okay? A reincarnating consciousness lays down the neural pathways in its new brain to support the carryover of personality and behavior patterns. NDEs and autism may impact neural functioning, which in turn affects how PLMs manifest. Now, it's even more interesting than that, because what this then suggests is that that our brain constitutions, our neurology, may have a lot to do with past life memory, right? And that perhaps could explain other things, like why these memories are more common in some populations than others, why they're more common in some families than others, right? If there is, a neurological pattern, and the neurological pattern in principle would be under genetic control, right? Maybe that helps explain some of these variations, some of these mysteries that we still have. So I think the autism cases in particular are really going to be very, very interesting to look at, because it takes us into things from that point of view. All right. Well, I've left a lot of time for questions. I got through this a lot faster than I expected to. Whenever I talk about these things, there always are questions. So I'm glad I've left time for that.
Now? Okay. Languages. Have there been any cases where someone reincarnated spoke a different language from their past life?
Yeah, very good question. Yes, there are. A different question from their past life? No. I mean, there are questions. I mean, are you asking whether the language from the past life can carry over to the present life?
Yes. Do they speak a different language than their parents?
Yes. Yeah, they do. I mean, some of these cases do. Yes, some of these children will. And more than that, some of them resist learning their native languages. We find this in international cases. In international cases and in cases where there's they remember having lived in a different linguistic group. That's when we see this.
Second to last question. Hypnosis. Has anybody tried hypnosis to delve into the subconscious mind and find memories that they don't remember in the conscious mind?
Right. It doesn't work very well, which is why it's really not used. Stevenson tried it. He was a psychiatrist. He was trained in hypnosis. He tried it, and he was not able to use it, particularly with his kids, but with the adults either. And so he really became very, very sour on the use of hypnosis to explore this. Yeah. It's quite useful in therapy, but not when you're trying to get at past life memories. And that shouldn't surprise us, right? Because we know that hypnosis is not that good. Age regression is not good at retrieving memories even of the present life. So why then should it be good at retrieving past life memories?
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, there's a question online. Who are the Druze?
I'm sorry, who are the Druze? Okay. Yeah, I did mention them several times. The Druze are an ethnic religious group in the Middle East, predominantly in Lebanon, but in surrounding countries too, some on the Golan Heights in Israel, in Syria, Lebanon, and at one point in Turkey, although we don't really have more in Turkey now. Qatar told us that last night. And Greece, he mentioned Greece, that historically there were also Druze in Greece. So they're normally called a sect. For a long time, they were considered to come under Shia Islam. They now have rejected that. I mean, they've always rejected it, but they're now more open in rejecting it. And they no longer consider themselves Islamic at all. They're not Muslim at all. But yeah, that's.
Okay. That word that you were using to describe them, can you spell that word for me? Because when you pronounce it, I keep hearing druids.
Oh, okay.
And I don't think you're talking about the druids.
Right. D-R-U-Z-E.
Thank you.
Druze.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
Okay. I was curious if you've ever read Convoluted Universe.
No.
And that guy who was up here asking about hypnosis and past lives, you'd enjoy Convoluted Universe too.
Okay.
It's 3 volumes written by a woman who is a psychotherapist. She trained herself in hypnotherapy. And the whole purpose of her hypnotherapy process was to take people to their past lives, not to heal or resolve anything, but to collect forgotten information.
Right. The problem with a lot of that is it can't be verified. I mean,
I understand that.
See, this is what the importance of Stevenson's research was that he was able to verify the memories, right? And so when we've looked at the memories that come spontaneously and voluntarily, we just find that they're a much higher quality than what comes up under hypnosis, and that's why Stevenson's soured on it.
Yes, but
I know a lot of people feel that way. A lot of people feel that way.
No,
yes, I know. Yeah.
I understand the need for science to focus on what science is available and knowing to focus on the material world and what is concrete. But there is also a level of consciousness where truth is truth is truth is truth. And there are people who can connect to that level and verify things there. And I know that is not up science's alley.
Yeah,
it's A-okay with me.
I don't want to get into an argument.
I don't want to get into
it.
Either.
You see, the problem I have with that is the same problem I have with the religions, and that is everybody says something different.
Okay.
So it's their truth, yes, but their truth is not a general truth. And so how can we be sure that that is truth with a capital T? So that's my problem with it.
Yeah.
And that's why I prefer the empirical science.
I get that, and I respect that too. Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Alex. I started getting interested in this when my son passed away 30 years ago.
Okay.
And started researching what happened to his soul. In your talk, I don't hear the word soul, S-O-U-L, mentioned hardly at all.
Right.
So it brings to mind, I did a lot of research over in the Casey Institute in Virginia Beach, and particularly Akashic Records.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts about Akashic Record or the history of the soul? Okay. Is there any scientific base? Because at his institute, he prides himself on a scientific base. He's 100 years ago.
Well,
he was very well followed and had over, I think, 1,000 cases of reincarnated experiences with his patients. Because he was the sleeping prophet. He would go into a trance and then diagnose people. But he would also go into their past lives.
Right. Okay. Yeah, my answer is going to be kind of long on this, I'm afraid, because there are a lot of strands to it. But first of all, to start with what soul is to me, this is one of the things I had to ask myself at the beginning. I mean, what is the soul, right? Because people say reincarnation, the soul is what reincarnates. What I realized or decided was that what makes most sense to me is to equate the soul with consciousness. At least when we're trying to talk to a scientific audience, it makes much more sense to talk about the survival of consciousness. We know what consciousness is. Soul makes it into a religious belief. It makes it into a faith thing, and which is very difficult for science to deal with. So if we talk about consciousness rather than the soul, it sort of shifts the whole dialogue. Now, Casey, one of the important things to realize about Casey is that he did two different types of readings, right? He did his health readings, and then he did his life readings. Now, his health readings are really very interesting. I mean, he's bizarre, particularly bizarre remedies, right? And that's a lot of that seems to be very, very interesting, clairvoyantly. When you come to his past life readings, though, it's not so interesting. He was very, very much influenced by Theosophy. And Theosophy was a 19th century occult tradition. You may have heard of Madame Blavatsky. And the Akashic Records idea is something that comes out of Theosophy. When Blavatsky first created this Akashic Records idea, there was still the idea, in science that the Earth was surrounded by an ether, right? And so her idea is that all events, all information was impressed on the ether, right? And the Akashic records from the ether. Now, the idea of the Akasha that goes back, you find that in Hinduism too. That's partly where she drew from it. But she tried to make it into a scientific thing by putting it on the ether. Unfortunately for her, the idea of an ether was disproved a few years after that. However, Theosophy stayed with this idea of Akashic records, right? Even though the whole basis of it, scientific basis of it, had gone away, right? Casey picked this up, right? So Casey, in fact, he said sometimes he got his information from the Akashic records. He said other times he got his information from reading the minds of his clients. When you look at what he said about their previous lives, when he read the Akashic records, he usually talked about a series of lives, 5 or 6 lives. When he talked about reading their minds, it was only one life, typically, right? Now, importantly for me, from my point of view, looking at this empirically, do we have any evidence of all of this? Guess which ones turn out to be more accurate? The ones where he says he's reading people's minds. The ones where he's talked about several lives, there have been analyses of this done, and they follow the same sorts of patterns. They tend to start in Atlantis, Lemuria, and then go through, France, and then come to the United States at some point. And he had put a lot of people, or royalty, and all of this. And it's just, when you really look at his readings and the patterns of his readings, it becomes very, very far-fetched to believe that that he's tapping into anything that's real. So because the whole scientific basis of the Akashic records has gone away, I don't put much stock in them. I think that when psychics can sometimes read the minds of their clients. Now, I want to add one thing. There's been recently a resurgence of this Akashic idea that puts the Akashic into a, quote, quantum field, whatever that is. I mean, so they're trying to take this idea, but move it from a cosmic level to a subquantum level, as if that's something that's known, with the same idea that all information is recorded there. But I don't see any basis for that any more than I do from the traditional idea of the Akashic records. I think this stuff is in our subconscious minds, and that psychics read the stuff, reading our subconscious.
Could you comment real quick about the universal consciousness and our link in your definition
Thank you.
of conscious of an individual versus the universal consciousness of all knowing, all being?
Well, I guess to a certain extent I certainly allow for that, right? I mean, I'm not going to dismiss it, that possibility that there is a universal consciousness, right? And that we are all connected at some sort of level. I mean, that's another part of this, another angle of looking at it. One is that there's a universal consciousness in which we all live and act. And another is that we had some sort of a universal root, say, a Jungian sort of idea of a collective unconscious. Those things aren't so interesting to me, though, as the personal consciousness streams, because it's the personal consciousness streams and the memories that go with them and the other behaviors and the personality and all that, which can be verified and related to a distinct person who lived in the past, died in the past. That's where it really becomes interesting. And that's when you've got something empirical and scientific that you can begin to look at, particularly when you start looking at patterns and seeing that there are these distinct patterns in all of these cases. That's where it becomes interesting scientifically. So, and that's sort of where I am at, but I don't dismiss it.
You got someone else, John, or no?
There's nobody.
Okay. Jim, there's so much material here. I'd like your question, but I can't remember most of it. I'm sorry. But
you should have had a pad to note it down.
The cases that Ian Stevenson studied of the children in India and the Druze that is, I think the fellow's living here in Richmond now, if I'm not mistaken, involved very, very specific memories of a past life, where somebody will remember their family, their wife or husband, their children, all that sort of thing. Are there any indications that those people that come into a lifetime with these very clear memories of a particular more likely not very recent past life, that they then have memories of other lifetimes as they go on, or
okay, yeah, good question. It's more common with adults than with children to recall multiple lives, but some of these kids do recall more than one life.
Okay, but so the ones that get written about are usually the ones that involve the one lifetime. Is that right?
I'm sorry?
I mean, the ones that get written about, the lifetimes that get written about is usually the ones where
the ones that get written about are the ones that the memories that are the most developed. And as it happens, when there are multiple lives recalled, particularly with children, one of the lives stands out, as being most developed. And the other lives, they'll remember fragmentary. They'll remember one scene or, one event, and that's really all. And so there's not enough to base any sort of case on that, any sort of report. They'll be mentioned in a report of the major case, but there's not enough really. There are only a few cases that have presented a rich enough detail to be reported for 2 lives for one individual.
I see. Okay.
Only a few, handful of them, right. Half dozen.
Now, on a personal level, I have had memories of a number of other lifetimes, and there didn't seem to be any pattern of more of male, female, that 50-50.
And yeah, okay, it's much more common with adults, and with some people like you, no pattern. Other people, definitely there is a pattern. They prefer one sex or the other. We see this very often, there are a number of interesting things about this, about the sex change phenomenon.
I didn't think of it as a sex change myself.
Well, but when you go from, but you implied that though. Yeah, I tried. We try to use these key terms. But you implied that if you've been both sexes, right? So you change sex from one life to another very often. So yeah, when we in those cases, we see, the children who recall having been the opposite sex will prefer games of the opposite sex. They will cross-dress. They will prefer, and if this lasts into adulthood, you get, the gender confusions and gender identity, issues. But what I wanted to say is that, interestingly, in Stevenson's cases, with the sex change cases, almost all, and he had 16, 15 of those were girls recalling having been boys or men. Now, what's going on there? Is it just boys are reticent to talk about? But we're talking about young kids here. I mean, they're not going to be old enough to be ashamed to be the boys to be ashamed to be having been a girl. I mean, not at age 2, And so it does seem like there's something curious there, and why we don't really know why. But many of these in adults who were in it, as I said, adults tend to recall more lives than women who recall having past lives will often recall a series of male lives. So there were males in the series, and now they're females, and this leads to various kinds of, of conflicts.
Now, I've done with regressions with people, hypnotic regressions, where they would go from one lifetime to another. One would be male, one would be female, and so forth, back and forth.
And probably no different, no impact. And probably no impact. I mean, they just go from one to another, and there's no behavioral.
Not in terms of my what I was.
See, and you see, this is one of the things that makes me suspicious of the regression stuff, because with the spontaneous stuff, we definitely see these behavioral impacts. Definitely see them. And so when they they say, oh, I was this or that person, I was this or that sex, I lived in this or that place, but there are no impacts on them. I mean, it makes me wonder.
Well, in terms of the hypnosis thing, there's a very well-known, I've done several programs with Brian Weiss, the psychiatrist, who's done, and there was one at Omega, I think it was 2003, where there was a woman who had come from China to take his week-long course, and she didn't speak a word of English, so she brought an interpreter with her who was interpreting moment by moment as he was talking, and he called her up to the stage to do one of his demonstrations, and so he was doing a hypnotic regression with her, and the interpreter was interpreting the language and so forth, and the woman was in some sort of a potentially mild hypnotic trance, but she went into a lifetime as a cowboy in Wyoming, and suddenly started speaking English in the language of a 19th century Wyoming cowboy, and the interpreter was still interpreting back and forth from Chinese, and Brian was speaking to her directly in English, and she was responding, and he was trying to tell the interpreter, you don't need to interpret anymore. She's speaking English now, and when the interpreter and he finally said, now just stop interpreting and just listen, and when the interpreter realized that knowing the woman could not speak a word of English in her waking consciousness, when she realized that the woman was speaking a very colloquial version of American English from the 19th century, the interpreter fainted on the stage.
This happened. Stevenson studied a couple of cases of what he called responsive xenoglossy. That's the term, the technical term for this is xenoglossy. What's interesting, and so we know that this sort of phenomenon occurs also in the regressions, not just in the spontaneous cases, the use of other languages. What's interesting is that with the spontaneous cases, the languages go along with information that allows one to identify the previous life. Not so with the regressions. Stevenson made great attempts to try to verify the information, to identify the people. There's a Japanese researcher who's reported a Japanese xenoglossy case from Nepal, actually went to Nepal, to try to verify this stuff. It was all confused.
Right.
So there, you do get this in the regressions, but there's other stuff there that's just simply confused that you don't find in the spontaneous cases. This is why researchers don't use regression. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, this stuff is interesting.
Right.
And, in a general way, yes, it's search for reincarnation, but not in the precise way that you get with the spontaneous cases where you actually identify a specific person.
I had a personal experience with the xenoglossy when I was a teenager. I had a profound NDE-like out-of-body experience, and I was in the course of the experience was having what was about a 30-minute conversation with a group that identified themselves as my spirit guide, and there was a friend that was staying over and sleeping on the opposite side of the room, and I awoke him with my conversation. And in the morning, he asked me about it, and I said, well, I talk in my sleep all the time, no big deal, He said, well, I was listening to you talk for about 30 minutes as if I were listening to one end of a telephone conversation, but you were not speaking English. You were speaking some language that I've never heard of before, and I'm very familiar with all the European languages, but you were just as fluent in it as you are in English this morning. And I checked later with through channeling on that, and the information I was given was that I was speaking a Urdu from Ur, or one of the Mesopotamian cities along the Tigris Euphrates in the around 3500 BC, in a language that I had another lifetime in, but has not been used for thousands of years.
Right.
And that the reason for that was to prevent the content of the conversation to be understood by anybody else.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
We things like that. I mean, they do suggest that, memories from, from a long time ago may still be in our subconscious. One of the NDE cases that I investigated and have written about, was a Norwegian case. The woman was 28, I believe. She had her NDE in childbirth. Before her NDE, she had, at most, what would be a sort of a deja vu feeling. After her NDE, at 28, she started having flashbacks cued by things that she saw in where she lived in southern Norway, but from a Viking life, right, 1100 years before her present. Now, we weren't able to solve that case. There are no records then.
Right.
However, a lot of the things that she said do fit with what is in old sagas and and archaeology also, and so we can say it's veridical. It was, but it's not solved, that case. But things like that do suggest that these memories can last for a very long time, and we don't merge all the lives that are subconsciously. I mean, we keep them discrete somehow.
Are you familiar with the work of Donald Hoffman? He's a neuroscientist at UC Irvine, and he wrote a wonderful book about 5-6 years ago called "The Case Against Reality," in which he hypothesizes that consciousness is really the fundamental strata of reality. Everything else is just an emanation of that, including the physical universe, and space, time, matter, quantum phenomena, all of it.
Right.
Which makes perfect sense in the context of your hypothesis about consciousness, in my opinion.
Well, yeah, it does. I mean, we can take this too far,
right?
But this is the philosophical position. It's called idealism,
right?
Where it's the opposite of materialism. Materialism is the idea that material is foundational to everything. Idealism, philosophically, is the idea that consciousness is primary,
right?
And that the material and everything else flows from consciousness. I'm an idealist philosophically.
Right. Yeah, but the interesting thing about Hoffman is he's taken the position from a scientific perspective,
right?
And rather than just
a
purely
philosophical
perspective.
Yeah. No, I'll look at that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, and by the way, I wouldn't be too quick to give up on the ether. It wasn't disproven; it was just discarded when Einstein came out with his special general.
Well, it was pretty much set aside.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Hello. I just wanted to ask a little bit about dreams and past lives, and if there's any sort of relationship between indicating you might have a past life through a dream experience.
Yeah, very good question again. Present life memories do sometimes appear in dreams. Right now, they're not very common. Studies have found it's only 1 to 2% of dream reports have memories of the present life. But if memories of the present life can surface in dreams, it shouldn't be surprising if memories of past lives can. And in fact, there are a lot of cases of past life memories surfacing in dreams. It's particularly with adults, because with adults, this is a part of my theory I really didn't get into. One of the, children's cases tend to be much more developed, right? We see not just the episodic memories, we see all the behavioral memories, all the different types of memory. With adults, that drops out, and we tend to get more just the episodic declarative type memories, right? The explicit memories, and not so much of the implicit. And why would that be, right? I think it's developmental. I think that the earlier on, it's just easier for all of these things to be expressed, right? The older subjects get, right, and particularly when they're in adults, the more we see the need for altered states to bring these in. And dreams in this context are a sort of altered state. So I think that's why that we see these sorts of memories recurring more in the dreams. And with the dreams will often come emotions. There'll often come also sense of things wider than what is seen in the dream. So there's some there's a context that's sort of felt, that's intuited, right? But the past life dreams, they're also very realistic, much more realistic than regular dreams, people say. They also tend to be recurrent in a way that most regular dreams are not recurrent. So there are these distinctions, but yes, definitely they're recurrent dreams.
There's a chat question. When we get to heaven, do we meet all our former families and friends? Are we greeted by our dogs and cats? And to clarify the question, do we meet all from all our past lives all at the same time?
Yeah, okay, I'll take the last one first. The last question has to do with something that comes up all the time in my Facebook group. This idea that everything is simultaneous, how will having it all at once. Somehow or other, this idea has gotten out there. The time is, not linear, that everything is happening at once. I'm not sure where that came from. I think philosophical and physical theory, but it's not anything that that I can give much credence to. I don't see support to it. And as far as the past lives go, they definitely follow in sequence. People who we can definitely see the impact of one life on the next. It's not like everything is happening at once. What was the other part of the question?
Do we meet all our
Do we meet everybody? Right. We can meet our pets, our cats and dogs, right? And sometimes we do. I mean, it depends on how long that intermission has been, because sometimes they've reincarnated, and they've reincarnated in our family. So we don't see them when we pass. We see them come back as our children or our grandchildren. But yeah, for those who have not yet reincarnated, yes, we can see them again.
Okay, quick question. If you're looking at the human being as a meat body versus the soul, just to take that dichotomy, you have psychologists and psychiatrists are trying very hard to measure what is normal for the individual and what is normal based upon a population. It seems like what you're trying to do, what you're studying, is trying to measure the same kind of thing in the same kind of way, at least from my point of view. Is that correct?
Yeah, and noticing that there are cultural impacts. I mean, they're both. I mean, there's some things that are universal or near universal for everybody cross-culturally, and there are other things where we do see these cultural impacts. Yeah, it's very similar to what's done in psychology. Yeah,
I do have a recurring dream that where I'm flying, and I don't necessarily have a human body, but it's a reoccurring dream.
Okay.
And I know early man before the airplanes, for a very brief moment when they jumped off the cliff, were flying until they came in contact with gravity. But this is really flying, really flying.
Right. Well, flying dreams are common, of course.
What does that mean? Do you have any?
No, not necessarily, no. Because flying dreams are so common, I don't think not all dreams are going to have past life references.
I understand. Okay.
You know? And so, but some may. I mean, and we can't always tell either. I mean, and so there may be something complex going on where there is a past life reference of some sort, but that gets associated with other things and gets presented, you know, the subconscious works all this together and presents it the way. So it's really hard to say sometimes exactly what's going on.
Well, the great thing about where we are right now, we have more information available to more people than the history of mankind. So we have the ability to share. We have the ability to share and compare and contrast and be able to link some of the things that weren't previously linked because we didn't have enough data to be able to come up with a base of information to be able to bring everything together.
And I would add that it's also easier now to make those connections because it's so much is available on the internet. We can make these connections a whole lot easier than we could before.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. So when a consciousness decides when a consciousness decides to come back or reincarnate, how does it decide which body to take or what situation to come in? And are we working towards something? I mean, is there, or is it random?
Right. Very good questions again. The central draw seems to be emotional. We don't seem to go into a new life, choose our new parents, knowing what we're getting into. Okay, we don't seem to knowing what we're getting into. The kids who describe in the intermission memories having selected their new parents, even if they're strangers, right? They've selected them on the basis of just something that they liked about them. And there's a Dutch case where, and I should say in these cases, sometimes there are assisting spirits that get involved with this, right? And the assisting spirits will show people like typically three for some reason, options. And so this kid said, well, he was shown these three options, and the one he chose was a boy who was playing a violin in a school concert, and the string snapped, but he continued to act like he was playing. And he found that appealing, and he liked that he did that. Now, this was still a kid in high school. That high schooler went on to become the boy's parent, though. So he's chosen his new father on the basis of an option given to him by this assisting spirit, right? And then he stayed with that person for many years as he grew up, got married, and had a child.
Okay, so the next question would be, does he have a long-term goal in mind? Does he have to improve himself somehow? And is that why he's choosing this experience?
Right. Honestly, we don't see a great deal of evidence for reincarnation being about growth or learning lessons or any of that. We just don't see it. And I think the reason we don't is that reincarnation is not just about human beings. It seems to be about all animals, and not just all animals, all life. And let me say this, make a point to say this. There's work now, serious work, about animal consciousness that is suggesting that it's not just animals that are conscious, but all of life is. There's been work with bacteria, with single-celled organisms, showing that they can learn. Now, if you can learn, you can remember. You can't learn if you don't remember, right? You have to remember, that means that memories are not recorded in the brain. They can't be. This is long before there were brains. We're going back to bacteria, single-celled organisms. And so it seems to me that there's not a great leap from saying all life is conscious. And that's the other thing about this. If we're talking about single-celled organisms, we're talking about all of life, not just animal life. We're talking about all forms of life that developed from these single-celled creatures, right? So if that's the case, I don't think, if that's the case that the consciousness is a part of all of life, I don't think that it's a great leap to say reincarnation is a part of all life, right? But it is sort of a leap to me to say life planning is a part of all life. That growth, spiritual growth, is a part of our life. I mean, we really want to say that the bacteria, are deciding where to go next, and they're trying to grow and become human beings. Do we really want to say that? The other thing which I ask myself is, do we really want to say that human beings are so advanced? How can we say that? Let's look look seriously, honestly, at what we do as a species to members of our own species, and look at other species and see if they do the same things to theirs. And the behavior patterns, which we can see evolutionary, that we've just developed maybe more than others. But other species are pretty, well advanced too. So where do we get off as human beings saying that we're so advanced? I just don't get it. So when I put all that together, I know the idea is out there. I know it's very strongly felt, but I don't see it. I just don't see it. To me, but the next question I got when I say this is that what then is reincarnation about? I think reincarnation is about, first of all, the conservation of consciousness, right? Conservation of energy, conservation of consciousness. I think that's one thing. I think it also provides an assist as we go into a new life, right? Because just like with kids who remember, or adults who remember having lived in another linguistic group and having trouble learning their native languages, right? And in international cases, it's not just that. International cases, the kids who remember having lived in a different place, they'll dislike the food, they dislike the clothing, they dislike the climate. It's difficult for them. So the converse of that is, if you are born, and the statistics of the cases show that most of us are reborn in the same regions, in the same ethnicities, in the same cultures, in our same, comfort zones, as I like to say. We're coming back to more or less the same thing, right? And so it may be then that reincarnation is about helping us, right? Helping us adjust to our new lives. I'll stop there because Carol is here with the question. Go ahead, Carol.
So a lot of answers that we've gotten, and for me, it always stimulates more questions. One of the questions I had listening to you talk about the intermission, my intermission memories have been very vivid. And where you talk about the different stages, I wondered if in the research that you've done, if they've described what their intermission experience was.
Oh yeah, some do. I mean, just like I said with NDEs, I mean, it varies. I mean, some don't say much, some say quite a lot. There was this, and it varies. I mean, it's just like with NDEs, it's not always exactly the same, right? So some of them talk about having met other entities occasionally, not as often as you might think, but occasionally a deceased loved one, right? Most often it's a spiritual entity. They'll talk about that. They'll talk about maybe just doing busy work type things. They don't talk about going to going to rooms or anything like that to plan their next lives. They don't talk about reflecting so much on their previous lives. It's more like a busy work time, but they do talk about experiences, yes.
And I just wanted to bring up also, if you'll say something about the Psi Encyclopedia, because that's another resource that you've contributed to immensely, and that can answer a lot of these questions that have been brought up too.
Yeah, okay, that's a good way to close. So there's several resources I can point to go further. One, of course, is my books. Another is I teach a course, an online course. It's a 15-week graduate level seminar course on this stuff. And if you're really interested in that, there's also the Facebook group. If you're on Facebook, come to that. It's called Signs of Reincarnation. And Signs of Reincarnation subtitle, Experiences and Research. The book is Signs of Reincarnation, Exploring Beliefs, Cases, and Theory, pretty much what I've done today. And then there's the Psi Encyclopedia that Carol mentioned. The Psi Encyclopedia is an effort of sponsored by the Society for Psychical Research in London, in England, that is sort of an attempt to answer Wikipedia, right? Because Wikipedia is very well known with being very dismissive of things like this, of anything, other than the materialist line. They're very skeptical of it. And it's very difficult to get in and edit things and bring in different perspectives because they have editors on Wikipedia that come in and delete it very quickly. And I've run into this. So Wikipedia was established as a way of putting out reliable information about a variety of, quote, paranormal subjects. Unlike Wikipedia, the articles are signed and they're closed. The editing is closed. The only people who can edit is the editor or somebody who is assigned to be able to do that once an article has been posted. So skeptics cannot then get in and change them. And so it's a very reliable resource. It's called the Psi Encyclopedia, PSI Encyclopedia, and it's online. And we have, on reincarnation now, we have got over 100 articles of different aspects of it. So it's a great resource for reincarnation, but for all sorts of topics in the quote paranormal. All right. Well, my time is up. So here's Tom again.
Jim, thank you so much. Great. Okay, folks. That was a wonderful, wonderful. I've actually got about another hour's worth of questions for you, but.